although we all agree that there's a lot of redundancy in what CMI-5 is doing. So there's some nuance in there in how we move forward. And I want to make clear, just because in a previous conversation, someone says, it sounds like you're abandoning CMI-5. And that's not the case at all. I think CMI-5, we're going all in on it. We're many of you know in source selection for an opportunity to build out a player and a conformance test suite. We're looking to update our policies. We're really trying to get that over the finish line too. But it's only one piece of what the overall vision for what this TLA, this enterprise digital learning modernization initiative going on within DoD is about. So to that end, these meetings are a way of doing that. Be very, 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 very clear here that these are optional, that these are, we're not requiring you to do this. In most cases, the performance work statement that we have written out for folks do not accommodate, that addition of metadata and all these other things. We do have a line in there that says something to the effect of must use ADL standards or something along those lines. But I think we all typically, agree that that means XAPI. We, in the future, will likely be strengthening that to start looking at some of these other standards as they mature. Many of these are still very much in the initial stages of research. Many of them are translating over to IEEE working groups or study groups that can become potential standards down the road. And that's all of what we're doing here is really designed to try to pull expertise out of your organization so that we can kind of feed that up through those IEEE study groups, working groups, and whatnot. And then we can also make the best decisions moving forward for the government. I respect the hell out of the Veracity folks that were in our shoes previously, so you all know exactly what I'm talking about. And I think that as we move forward here, I just wanted to be clear that this is totally optional, and any participation that you all do in this is greatly appreciated. I fully expect our teams to learn a lot about what we're doing from you all, because it really does take a group to move forward on this. So I will keep my mouth shut as best I can for the remainder of this meeting. But I just wanted to kind of state that up front, that it's very well appreciated that you all are participating here.
Alrighty, I guess that's my cue. All right, guys. Thanks for coming up. By the way, we'll be talking with the mom, as everyone knows. But before we can do that,
Florian. I guess it would have helped if I had unmuted myself. I just wanted to acknowledge we also have Cliff, Will, and Shelly from Yet with us now, and Iwa from ADL also joined. And thanks, Brent, for the thorough introduction of the purpose of the meeting. I just wanted to make sure to mention that we are going to record the briefing that Florian is going to provide regarding the TLA mom that we already have queued up. And after that, we will shut down the recording so that if there are any concerns about kind of questions or dialogue, we can have that off any kind of recorded record.
So let me clarify on that, Marcus, too.
Yep.
One of the concerns that Dr. Schatz brought up, and I'm just going to put it out there, is that, well, in participating with this, because we're the ADL initiative, and even though we're just SATA contractors, that people might be afraid to speak negatively about anything that we're working on. God, I hope that's not the case. I know I've had conversations with Rob and Jono in the past about what it was like going through the SCORM testing with Claude Austin and others and stuff. So I hope that you do be brutally honest and push us so that we can be smart about our answers. Because if you're not doing it, someone else is going to do it, and then we'll get caught with our shorts down. We don't want that, right, Aaron? Anyway, I just want to make sure that be open. This is really a technical interchange. This isn't business development. This isn't anything other than us collaborating, trying to work together to solve problems for the government. Over.
Yeah. Thanks. So with that, I think we'll just hand it over to Florian to start off his briefing on the TLA mom.
Alrighty, thanks, guys. So as I was saying, before we can get into what the mom does, we do want to talk about what we found out regarding learning systems, right? In the 2018 implementation, we had a centralized system where we had a single singleton that ran the state of every other system in the TLA, which it's easy to build and it's easy to plug into, but it doesn't scale very well. And when that single point broke, everything else broke, and that happened more than once. So instead, we are moving towards a distributed network where the nodes don't particularly care what other nodes exist. They just care about the information they get. And while it's harder to build, it scales much better and it's much more resilient. It's not going to break down nearly as often, especially because when one system breaks, the other ones can keep going without it. Now, we did have some questions regarding what the mom is actually trying to do. While I have this big wall of text, I will try to give you the even shorter version, which is the mom is trying to act as a language for a distributed system where we have everything have no state on its own, and they just respond to the triggers that the mom sends out, and then they keep doing what they're doing. This is actually for anyone trying to build a large learning and development product or platform, as it allows them to communicate with others. And the whole point of this is we're trying to allow the information to exist and to be tracked, but not to overwhelm anyone, and for it to be the same format for everything. Alrighty. And the last thing I want to do before I talk about the mom is talk about the actual platform that will be using it, which is here the TLA. As you can see, we have multiple systems. We have multiple systems, and they all don't really care about the other ones. They just care about the information they're getting, which is the mom. I'm going to highlight the mom-specific systems now here. And as you can see, the mom is not actually a system, but it's just the information being passed around to other statements. So this is just, again, the really high-level overview of what is using it right now, and we're hoping to add stuff to it in the future. So let's break down the mom. We have the mom broken down into three things. First of all, we did take the CMI5 verbs. Now, this does not require that you follow CMI5. As a matter of fact, all we care about is that you have the events being tracked and sent to our LRS. However, using CMI5 will not break anything. We do not say you cannot have additional information. We are just saying you need to at least have these events in this order. The second large part of the mom is actually the learner career state information. This is supposed to track where the learner is from the moment that they join, and in our case, the moment they enlist, to the moment that they are released from service. This even tracks under what context they are then interacting with this learning system, because we know if they are employed or going to school, or even if they were out in the field. So we'll get a bunch of statements from them at once. And the final part of the mom is actually this big, giant, scary flowchart. I do want to I'll break this down more, but this does hold the four main key statements that are coming with the mom, not including, obviously, the CMI5 verbs, which are highlighted here, which is just a way to manage user access to content and also track the learning that came out of this with the asserted verb. So the first big chunk of the scary diagram is all the red verbs. These are why the learner is doing what they're doing. Not only is this a way for learners to be given access to events by giving them or scheduling them to do a task or approving them to join a class, it's also talking about what goals they have and if they are going on the content because they just did something else and thought it was cool, and now they're learning more stuff, or if they have been given a task, or if they're searching to learn a thing. This can actually be used in the future, or hopefully to track what learner learns best in what way. But that is, again, we're just giving the information. We aren't building the UI system that reads this information. Up next, we have the blue verbs. These are actually the outcomes of the actual learning events. There are two entry points at this point. The gray boxes you see here, those are actually the CMI5 verbs being sent. Once the CMI5 verbs are sent, you are then generating the blue verbs. And you can look here. I'm going to go back a slide just to show you again. The top gray verbs come from the red, And then the bottom gray verbs here, these are coming from actually being scheduled and being told to do something. This is just learning in the wild. You just did something that happened to be plugged into our system, and now we are tracking that you learned something incidentally. This is the pedagogy flow we're trying to track here. And this all gets fed into, did you take a test? Did you just learn something? Or were there changes to the actual framework that caused you to learn something new? Now, speaking of frameworks, we're talking about the green verbs now. This is the outcome of all this learning. You are either, asserting competence, or you are given a credential, as well as additional information as to how you got there. If you look up here, once again, the point loops back to the blue verbs, as you can have the competency frameworks change, and then you have a change in competence just because the required information to do something has been changed. And a very good example that was given to me as to why we would want this is, say, for example, a new microscope came out, and it's no longer hard for people with glasses to see what's going on. All of a sudden, the ability to use a microscope is no longer required, and all of a sudden, I am that much closer to being a chemist or a biochemist, because I can now see these small little organisms without having that specific skill set to use the complex microscope. The final points I will bring up before I will open the floor for questions is talking about the purple verbs. This is, think of LinkedIn. When you appear in searches, this is exactly that. It's tracking you either on gained credentials, it's tracking you on measures of performance, and it's measuring you on measures of effectiveness. And again, these are all just, you showed up in a search, and then I'm going to go way back to the front of the slide again. Being so you showed up in a search, and then an admin did something for you. And that's it for my presentation. Do we have any other questions?
Hey, Florian, can you speak to the actors for these verbs? It looks like it's a mix of human learner actors and either system or LRPs as actors.
Yes. So originally we tried to set it up so that in this thing here, every single actor is always going to be the human learner. However, this caused issues as we then had to use the passive tense for verbs, and that is, while it's not forbidden in the spec, it's considered bad form. I believe you were there and kind of helped us find that mistake. So normally we have the actor always being the, or primarily the actor is going to be the human learner that is doing something. However, with things such as suggested, it is the machine, and if you get the actual XAPI spec, it tells you what each actor is supposed to be, both the written spec form and the giant JSON document that is the mom profile explain where the actor is not meant to be the learner. And in that case, we've actually added a new extension that actually tracks which learner is affected by this. So for example, in the recommended verb, we have Brent recommended taking test A, and then the extension of the learner would then be Florian, because Brent recommended I am the one that takes it. And that's always going to be the exact same extension. It's always going to be the learner extension for non-actor-centric verbs. Is that what you were asking?
Yeah, got it. Thank you. That's helpful.
Perfect. Anyone else? I don't bite, I promise. Yes, there is an instructor role. So we have an OICS. So the OICS, it's not the easiest to see in this diagram here, but here you can log in as a student, as an admin, or as an OICS, and the OICS is actually the one that tracks, creates approvals and directions, as well as the one that actually performs searches.
Florian, I got a question for you. I see that this title is Learning Event States. And there's one or two of these. I'm looking specifically at certified. I'm very interested in how you get stateful information out of the document stream. Like what are the semantics there? Are you saying like the last certified verb is true? Can he be uncertified? You know,
Yes.
like how do you get a
So-
stateful data model out of the event stream here?
So this is actually a thing that we do have. For example, I'm going to go back to the asserted verb instead of the certified verb just because it's easy to explain with this one, but we have weights, correct? And the weight scale goes from -1 to 1. And it is possible for someone to say they are so bad at something that we take away assertions. For example, if for some reason people say that Florian is great at sports, and then somehow someone manages to get me on a basketball field, they will immediately assert with -1 that Florian is a sports guy. And then the assertion goes away from me. That should then bring the certification and know the certification as well. That is a good question, Aaron, regarding voiding certified.
Well, and I'm asking a little bit. Sorry about that. I'm asking a little bit more, less about the fact that there was an assertion of competence. That makes some sense. So you're saying you're not using the statements as a stateful data model. Like you're not going to look at the pilot statements and say he currently is certified for this.
So I'm going to go back to this image here. Again, this is just data. So what happens is you have the certified verb come in to the stream, and then the learner profile reads in, hey, he was just certified. And then they change their database and their permission on the learner saying, hey, this is a certification that he has. And then another certification would come in saying, hey, this person, either it's a certification saying he can't do it, or we might do it via voiding the certification, but an event comes in that nullifies it. And then again, it gets pushed over to the learner profile. The learner profile hears, hey, this just happened. And then it removes it. And then this history of what the learner had and didn't have gets tracked inside of the LRSs, but it doesn't stay in the actual learner profile. The learner profile is the current snapshot of where you are at, and then the LRS is the what all happened to get you there and where were you in the past.
Yeah, that makes perfect sense. Thank you.
Yeah, glad. Anything else? Aaron, I think I was able to answer your question regarding the voided, or not. Big text, give me a second to read all that.
Yeah, I think you've answered the question, Florian. So you have other systems that are picking apart and analyzing and making sense of this data, but it is not the job of this profile to account for how all of this stuff is going to be interpreted in the end. This is basically for us to present the best roadmap we can of what's supposed to happen in an ideal situation. And it's up to the configuration of the actual environment to interpret these analytics and make use of them on their triggers. Would that be an accurate statement?
Yes, that's 100% correct. As a matter of fact, one thing that we're hoping to do with the way that we're architecting this is it is possible for someone to just start. You don't always need to start. Oh, hold on, I'm using the wrong monitor here. You don't always need to start in at the login role. It is possible for someone to, for example, just be given a blue, they were assessed on this verb, and then that finished the flow going all the way down to the green and then conferring or something or not conferring something and then ending it. Because it's a bunch of not really very loosely tied systems, they don't care if you get the first part, they just care that they get their piece of evidence.
Right. I think I'm following. So it is because a profile in the context of thinking about an enterprise analytics strategy, there's a lot of overlap between what these things cover. It's easy to get lost in the idea that the profile has to account for everything. No, the profile has to account for all the rules in an ideal situation. Your implementation strategy and all the guidance that you go into building the business rules around that have to enforce that the system's going to do everything that you intend to do setting up in the profile. But the profile is what we're really designing is with the profile, the ideal state of the data. There's a separate activity that gets into how to interpret the data, what to do with these triggers and actions, and how to deal with like all sorts of like fault states where things go wrong. But that's not the job of the profile. I want to make sure are we all
Yes.
same page there? All right, cool.
Yeah, 100%. That is something that I'm with this talk, especially we're trying to push that agenda that again, the profile is not a system, it's just information.
Okay, good. I think I'm good with that. So
do we have any other questions or concerns before we stop recording? And then we can get root remarks in?
I'm not opposed to recording if we have the remarks in, unless
Yeah.
everyone else is.
I think the recording, to be honest with you, I think there's a lot of good dialogue. I've seen
This
a lot
is
of
value these recordings oftentimes.
Well, what's been presented so far is been the best picture I've had so far in understanding what this is supposed to be and why specifically this came about. So I'm in favor of the rude comments if there are any, such as they are, just so we can kind of get to the point where things are actionable.
This is Will Hoyt here. I don't have a rude comment, but I am curious if any of these same colored verb kind of logical pathways are codified as patterns within the XAPI profile, not to necessarily treat the profile as a system, but rather as a reference of how, within system engagement should be, laid out and across system engagements. From that perspective, if that makes sense.
Okay, so the colors are more there to track what kind of evidence they're giving or what kind of event they're tracking. But if you look, for example, at the red verb, at the red section, there are flows within it. For example, let me pull up my other monitor again. So you start out here, you log in, you plan something. So this is you setting a goal. You are then going through and you are requesting an event. You're requesting a class because it has something to do with your goal. We go back, and then the OICS or the instructor class sees, hey, you requested something, and they can then approve you to do this event. You go back again, you go through the flow, you see you got it. You are then scheduled to the task, and then you hit your CMI5 statements.
A couple points there, Florian.
Go ahead.
Just to add to what you're saying, the key there is that those verbs may be generated by different systems. They might not even be the learning activity. It may be some sort of scheduler or recommender or some sort of other third-party system that would then generate that. And so these are being stored independent of the learning activity.
So, yeah, the only actual ordered set of verbs are these right here. The CMI, is it not showing up for some reason?
So when you say ordered verbs, are you talking about each one of these planned events or projected events or organized events would correspond to a action within a system or a statement that is produced that contains that verb?
Can you rephrase the question? I'm sorry, I'm a little confused.
Sure. So can we go back to the big everything slide?
1 second, it's taking a few seconds to propagate.
Cool. So let's say we were following that pathway you just described, where we have the assignment, the approval, and then we move on to the actual learning activity. The action of requesting and the action of approval, are those events going to be represented as XAPI statements? Those XAPI statements having statement templates defined within the MOM profile?
Yes.
Okay, and then would there then subsequently be patterns describing the sequence of generic statements that correspond to this data flow or this logical progression through?
So there are expected patterns, yes, and that's what you see here is the list of expected patterns that you see. as the mom grows, I'm expecting to put more patterns in, as there really are a lot in there that really don't fit, just because it's so it's meant to go with a bunch of different systems. So even the planned verb or requested verb can come from a completely different system than the verb that sends approved. So
Yeah, totally.
we don't always entirely know we're going to get all of the verbs at once. So it's possible to skip verbs in the patterns, requiring us to make even more patterns.
Yes, 100% agree and understand that explosion of complexity and just how much you have to write there. But I just wanted to get a better sense of what kind of the thought around that was, because there's definitely like a lot of interesting pathways here, and it'd be a shame if they were restricted to just this slide presentation, or they were split up between multiple different systems and we kind of lost this bigger picture view. And I think that patterns definitely help at least provide one way of saying, hey, these are the expected learner pathways or data pathways or whatever you want to call it. But yeah, that's my 2 cents. Over.
Yeah, in the MOM as it is right now, the patterns themselves are very light. I think it's primarily just CMI5 and then the planning stage, requesting stage, and then the credential conferral stage. But there definitely are expected flows that should probably be added to the MOM in the near future.
All right, I have a question about some stuff I dug into in the spec, the document that looks like an IEEE standard. One of the things that are in there is the assumption that this is based on the XAPI standard, not the actual 1.0 spec. And one of the questions I have now that we're talking about how these statements are coming from different systems is there an assumption, not necessarily this is support, because this is not supported by the current profile spec, but it may be hypothesized that this is what the profile standard through IEEE would accomplish, even though that doesn't exist yet. Is there an assumption that we need to control for the actors in terms of like in the way in which we do determining properties in these statements with controlled by profiles? Is there some assumption here that we are also going to be controlling for determining properties based on the attributes of actors for these assigned statements that are supposed to come from specific systems?
That's a great question, Aaron. I can tell you that this interrelates very heavily. I can only speak to the DoD perspective on that. We need to kind of think about this from a community aspect outside of DoD as well. The DoD answer to populating the actor for the MOM as it goes from an edge activity like a learning management system or a mobile learning application or a simulator system is going to be the EDIPI number on the back of a CAT card. We've been working with the DOD CIO folks, DC, and DISA to get everybody online with that. The only people that were holding out at one point was some areas within the Navy, but I think most people are coming to the agreement that EDIPI is the right way forward. We expect that will be the way that we do the anonymized that meets all the privacy security and whatnot within DoD. Now, how do we parlay that in reference to the profile, and how do we call that out? Because it's going to be different from how the community looks at that. So the MOM isn't as much concerned about the actor, admittedly, although we're assuming that the actor is going to be the EDIPI. No, does that make sense?
Yes and no. So 2 things there. One is I see just to cut to the chase. If this is an interoperability challenge for us, I'm going to say that all the business rules and all the functionality around making sense of controlling for actors and stuff like that is pushed on the business rules and the architecture and not on the profile, because that's not something that we can currently do in a meaningful time frame with any assurance that what we end up producing is exactly how the standard is going to roll out, right? I mean, that's a risk that I don't feel comfortable taking at this point. But that said, if the EDIPI is the way in which you're gonna deal with the controls on that, that's great. Does that also mean then that every system involved in the TLA is going to have an EDIPI number so that that rule is consistent? Or is that really only going to be, are there going to be conditional rules for statements that come from humans versus machines?
I feel like that is more of a user management thing, unless I'm completely missing the point, Aaron.
Well, I guess my point is like, I'm trying to think over the very, very long term. Even if we go, so I'm making some assumptions right now that we are going to produce a profile that conforms to the current version of the profile spec, because that's the one that's real. And to the degree that we can account for any changes in the next API 2.0, we're going to have to talk about that. But I don't even want to go into that yet, because that's still getting out of IEEE. So part of that's a little scoping issue from a project perspective. The larger question I have, though, is that if you're going to deal with enterprise collections of analytics and you're looking to do the stateless and you're looking to have like one set of rules under one set of policies and rules under which all this data is going to be evaluated, then the decision around the EDIPI being like the main controlling vector on actors and actor collections as it relates to the MOM is going to be important ongoing in your overall interpretation. So whether or not you choose to do that in business rules or in the profile or switch them off later on, that's fine. We just need to be mindful about what we're doing and why.
That makes sense.
I'd like to quickly follow up on that, not from the so much the enterprise data angle as from just the reality of what's going on bases for training angle. I'm concerned that anything that would limit the actor data collection to a CAC card is going to create a bottleneck in the real world. There's plenty of training that's going on the bases that is more informal, that could be shut out of use if profile requirements are set up that way.
Let me address that right away, Shelley, because I agree with you wholeheartedly. This is just purely the requirements that are coming down. So FICAM is a reality. It's a federal policy that's being pushed out. The DoD is actually calling it ICAM, the DoD ICAM, and that draft strategy is out right now. I can maybe find it and send it to you. I think I have a copy somewhere in my inbox. The reason that they're going with the EDIPI is for a couple of reasons, right? So you can get these enterprise usernames and they're going to change throughout life, right? Or throughout your career as you get married or divorced or you move on and you change your names. The enterprise usernames will likely change, but the EDIPI number is assigned to you at the very beginning of your career and throughout your, whether you're a contractor or whether you're a green suitor or a government civilian, that EDIPI number will follow you. And so that is the lifelong learning record that they want to be able to work with. So with that in mind, as we feed that data up to the enterprise level, whatever user data that we collect across the various networks, we will have to figure out a mechanism to convert whatever the local usernames are for whatever network they're in. And so ICAM is being pushed out through the .cio to all the different schoolhouses and other networks that are part of DoD. And so there already is a requirement to reconcile and to register the local usernames with, it's called the attribute services API or something like that within DMDC to register what those local names are and then roll them up to the EDIPI. At the enterprise level, that's where we're kind of tracking that. I tend to agree that these are all such new initiatives that are moving on. I mean, they just put the things under contract earlier this year for the ICAM stuff. So who knows when or how that roadmap's going to play out. We just know it's going to happen. And so a lot of these things are really about formulating, about helping us have these informed discussions. As you mentioned, if we're completely locked into EDIPI, we may miss a lot of valuable experiences throughout the pipeline. So how do we make up for that? Do we have to build scrapers that are going to convert your Google history to to EDIPI and feed that on up? I don't know what the right answer is, but these are great questions. Do you have other recommendations, Shelley, on the best way to track a user and to reconcile who that user is throughout the continuum of learning within? I mean, I think that all options are on the table still, but.
If it were up to me to create the federal government's identity policy, we'd be living in a much different world.
Probably a true statement. I think there's other initiatives that are going on as well with identity, shared identities and whatnot. So we'll have to look and see how some of this plays out. My hope is that there will be standards to help dictate some of that.
Actually, a very practical sort of question related to this. Does that mean that the profile would be exclusive to members with such an identification, as opposed to anyone else who, on a base or at a community college or whatever within the DoD, like family members, dependents, etc., they would not be included in what would be collected through MOM?
No, there's a whole separate problem space, actually, is family members and other things right now. So I think that Aaron kind of was talking about this under the guise of business rules, and when I vehemently agreed with him, I think that's where we're going to have to address a lot of this. So the MOM profile may not get to that level, but the business rules that we need to incorporate in TLA might sit there and dictate how DoD populates the actor name versus how General Motors might populate the actor name, or how someone else, maybe that's stuff that falls into that CMALT standard. I don't know. That makes sense?
So, Brent, I think I'm following, but I want to follow up on Shelley's question and your point with one more question. Would you say that the goal then is to genericize the MOM approach so that it can be reused in this other larger problem space, or are we focusing specifically on this business problem for DoD people?
Could you say that again, Aaron? I didn't know if you were directing that to me or Shelley.
Well, I was directing that to you. Is the goal of this, of the MOM profile, because you recognize that this is a problem space for everybody else outside of DoD, but with other complications, other complexities, other challenges? Is there an inherent goal that we are to genericize this approach so that it can be reused or extended in some way for things we haven't identified for this larger problem space? Or is our goal simply to help us solve this problem for DoD employees?
I would say it's the former. I would prefer that we try to solve the problem generally speaking versus specifically to DoD. The stuff that's specific to DoD, I would prefer to try to wrap into business rules for how we populate certain portions of that. But I'd like the the mom profile to be as generic as possible. That's just Brent's opinion. Yeah, I think that covers that. I do think that part of the justification for this is we were kind of, as Florian was kind of talking about, really, we were trying to look at this as truly an ecosystem. So everything that you see there, all those verbs are really learner centric. They are really just to describe, where is, if you look at all the common milestones that you have with any learning activity, whether you're, registering or just thinking, I want to learn to be a pilot, you have a goal set. Any of that information plays into, it's information about the learner that we want to document, that we want to catalog, or we want to capture. So if you think of it as just a ledgering system, whereas at the edge, XAPI is a ledger of every nuanced interaction that an individual takes with a learning activity. The MOM is a way to normalize the data coming out there, to really talk about those life cycle milestones of learner engagement, whether they completed it, started it, paused it, whatnot. But it's a little broader, as it's also thinking about the planning, the goal setting, the whole life cycle of learning, from registering, from career growth to getting selected for a job. And once you have that job, it opens up the aperture for new jobs that you might be eligible for after some experience. And so a lot of thinking went into that. We've had a lot of people looking at that. We don't claim that it's 100%, but that was the overall intention for how to broaden that aperture outside of training and education, to be thinking of it in the context of the human capital supply chain and where training and education might fit. Because certainly the experiences you have, the deployments you have, they also will paint some evidence of competency.
Well said. This is Trey, by the way. I'll try to, I guess, split the problem up into the two things, two sort of ways I kind of view it. So the MOM itself, I'm kind of imagining that as being, sort of life cycle. This is what you have to call this, all that sort of pageantry. I think the only time we start talking about CAC-EDIP is when we're talking about this notion of the roll up to, okay, who the hell is it talking about on a unique DoD scale? So if you do have a system like, I get learner records from my time working at McDonald's or something, I sure as hell didn't have my CAC card there. So they couldn't have done anything with me there, or undergrad or grad school. There's no notion of EDIPI for any of those, record stores. But if any of that information ever wanted to get rolled up to my DoD profile, like the one unique thing that the federal government is contributing to me as far as DoD status, then I think that's the only place where EDIP would start to come into play. Other than that, I think it's honestly just going to be whatever actor state, your individual enclaves wanted to use. So that's how I'm viewing it. So if maybe anyone has a disagreement on that.
Will Hoyt here. I think the only place where conflict starts to come up is when you think about role-based activities, for like the example of the administrator versus the learner, and how that information about the actor is communicated within the individual statements themselves.
So I have a question on maybe granularity, and maybe a question and a comment. So, I'm looking at the different verbs that you have for this, and I don't have it in front of me, but I remember looking at the current MOM profile document, and I believe like there's just a couple different activity types for some of them, and they're general. It's kind of like that TLA activity is one of the types. And I'm wondering if you thought about, like, do you expect to get this data at a certain level of granularity? Like, do you expect this at a course level, simulation level, module level, lesson level, video level, specific question or interaction level? all of the above, or is there a line or some determining factor that tells you where you expect this mom data to come through in kind of the general hierarchy of the different types of activities that you may experience?
So I'll field that one and then get Trey and Florian's thoughts on it as well. But I think we're actually looking at it at the learning activity level. So if you look at the MOM structure, we had typically looked at the object as either being the unique identifier that references the activity, whether it's a simulation scenario or a course or a mobile application or just a video in the experience index. If you remember sitting through some of the sandbox meetings that we were having with USA Learning, that experience index is kind of the inventory. It's like a library card system for all the different training activities. And so by passing that identifier over to ultimately CAS or another competency management system, CAS knows where or which library card to pull in as it's trying to calculate what that assertion means. And so all these MOM messages actually are intended to normalize the data coming from all different learning activities, not just courses, but simulators or eventually social types of learning, whether you instrument SharePoint or Teams or whatever. I can see it where it would be able to roll up in that way. That answer your question? Trey, do you have thoughts?
I guess more of a no, thought's a good word. I could definitely see the reluctance, the hesitation to have something, like a predefined set of activities, right? Because then you run the risk of something feeling overly not prescriptive, but maybe constricting. So if you do end up with the granularity of like, okay, well, what do I pick for my simulation or my video, sort of like you were mentioning, then things can feel either kind of ham-fisted or, well, this doesn't really fit, but I kind of have to do it because the spec told me I have to do it. So I get that. I suppose things will just have to be kind of flexible. I'm not sure the best way to go about that now.
Okay.
Yeah,
Well, I guess.
Go ahead.
Sorry, go ahead, Brian. Go ahead.
Oh, I was just going to say it was interesting because I was having some conversations on the STEE program yesterday outside of a meeting we had earlier on. We're going to meet further to talk about that today, but they have training support packages that are required for all STEE deliverables, and inside there they have a whole list of metadata that they have to be able to generate. And so one of the things we're trying to do now is to try to do that alignment between, what is the Army metadata that's being called out, and some of the draft specs and the P2881 group that we're trying to push forward there. I will say that as far as the XAPI, the MOM statements go, there's still a lot to be worked out with that. Like I mentioned, the object might be the unique identifier for the activity that sits inside the experience index. But I know that, and I'm going to be real fuzzy on this, probably going to get myself in trouble here, but I think it's the SENS model that talks about, an object might be a competency ID. So certainly if an assertion is being made by a credential or going straight to the credential, there's probably different ways to implement the MOM, different contexts, depending what system's generating those verbs and whatnot. And so
yeah,
when I say that, we're referencing an experience index. Not everybody's going to have an experience index. So there's different ways to do it, so to speak. Yeah,
I guess I understand that you're talking about the activity here. I guess my question, and maybe that is answered anyway, is more along the lines of like, let me give you a specific example. This is the kind of stuff that we run into where somebody will have some real granular, like the object of their statement will be like the interaction, the questions, the things that they're doing, and those are on an assessment, and based on there will be a way down granular, hey, here's how they answered a question. Based on how they answered 20 questions, there'll be what score did they get? Did they pass, fail? Did they complete the assessment? That assessment then is part of a lesson, depending on how they did on the assessment or several assessments. They also get a scored, completed, passed, failed, waved status on the lesson. That lesson can be part of a module that has multiple lessons. That module can get a pass, failed, completed, scored, etc. based on all the lessons that are in that module. That module can be part of a chapter, and so on and so on and so on. So it's that kind of hierarchy that I'm wondering, like, is there a line that you expect? Do you expect data at all of those levels to conform to this MOM profile and use context in a way that you know that these things are related? Or do you expect things, really only at the lesson level or only at the course level, knowing they're all activities, but like, are you expecting data to come from a more rolled up level or all levels?
So I know I have my thoughts on this. What are your thoughts? I'm happy to share mine, but I want to color your thoughts.
Yeah, I don't know.
Okay. Well, so that's a fair answer, and I will say I have thoughts. I'm not 100% that they've been thought through at every level, but I do think that when we think about what we're trying to do with this whole concept of lifelong learning, and we know that we need to kind of go across organizational and institutional boundaries, and most of those will be kind of credentials getting thrown over the fence, and completely fine with that. But within the DoD, we need more than just credentials to throw over the fence. We need that evidentiary store there. And so this approach is really just trying to, it's a twofold approach, right? So each of these learning activities will end up generating, we were calling them micro credentials, but what badges, I guess, whatever they end up being. And that's been a big part of the context of the discussions inside of STE, is that as these different scenarios are done, you'll get these little badges that you completed these different scenarios, which then are just another learning experience along the way. And then, as you kind of said, now we have this ledger of all the different learning activities that you've experienced and additional pointers to all the evidentiary stores that have more detail, more granularity about your performance in these. So 20 years down the road, they're probably not going to really be worried about lessons that I took about being a pilot or anything along those lines. But it's something that somebody could go back, depending on those business rules on how long they store that type of data, that they can start to go in and relook at that evidence to combobulate it differently. So really the MOM is to roll up that data while saving that evidence so that it still sits there at the edge without having to flood the network with all those bazillions of XAPI statements. Let's just reduce it down to a handful of XAPI assertions using the MOM profile.
Yeah, that's my gut feel. Also, Brent, and I guess the non-answer to that question is whatever for people who follow in the DoD the MOM profile. The answer is, you need to supply that information at the level of the activities that are in your activity metadata index. That's the level that you need to report it at, but that's a cop out because that doesn't tell you the actual level. But I agree with you that you probably don't need all of those details, and there's at some point a rolled up value that you care about in there where you don't have to do all that detailed stuff. Even though that detailed stuff might have this type of data, you may not care about it because it's too detailed to roll up into the MOM. Which is
I'll tell you, one of the thoughts that we had on this was, fail forward, fail fast, and don't do anything catastrophic. Those 3 points kind of drove
Bringing up the too detailed stuff, actually, I want to go back to that. There is actually a thing we've been doing with the MOM, talking about 3 different levels of LRSs, where we have a noisy LRS, and that is where you store all of your detailed stuff, and then we bring up to the transactional authoritative. So we do have that noise filtering built into it.
I was just wondering, like, where is that line? How do I know if I'm putting noisy data in one of my noisy LRSs? It's MOM data, it's completions, it's launched, it's waived, but it's at such a granular level and it's rolling up to a higher level. Where's the line is kind of what I was getting at there, Florian. So we are tracking the same type of data that you expect in the MOM, but it's at such a granular level and it's already rolled up for you in the noisy LRS that you might not want it all in there anyway. Does that make sense?
Oh, yeah, my bad.
Yeah, no, you're good. So I guess one other, and here was the thought. So I'm wondering if you've thought, or in the groups that you've talked to about, Florian, as you had mentioned, there's multiple systems that may create the data that you anticipate in these different patterns. So, one statement comes from a learning management system that it was launched, then you get actual score data from the content itself, etc. And I'm wondering if you have kind of divided up, these are the systems, and these would be the conformance requirements as far as the MOM goes. So if you are an HR system, you would have to do these statements. If you are a competency system, you would have to do a assertion system, you'd have to do these statements. If you're content, you'd have to do these statements, and then basically ensure that that is mapped to the MOM. And the only reason I bring that up, go ahead, sorry, Ren.
I was going to say, we do have a lot of that lined out in the functional requirements document that we did with the TLA. As a matter of fact, it's on my plate right now. We've got almost all the revisions in. I've got to go through and fine tune those to get that back out. But we really did try to hone in on exactly what you're talking about which systems are generating which parts of the MOM. A whole different section on that.
I'll tell you why I bring it up is, like, there's always this balance between, like, the academic exercise of making the perfect data model and the perfect process, and then the ability to get it adopted and implemented in the real world. And I'm not saying this goes either way. I'm just saying that this is complex and there's a lot of different systems. And you look at the XAPI, personal experience, I don't know if other people in the call have the same one, but personal experience is, people have trouble doing score the same way, let alone having multiple
you're not kidding.
Right. So it has to be really clear, I think, on what requirements are made on what systems in this architecture, so that they know exactly what they have to do to play in the TLA.
Yeah, and again, this is so new. One of the things that we tried to do was really create a way that we can provide options. Here's the basic level of capability to roll up the data. There's always different ways to do things. This way kind of scales. We've done a lot of testing on it to see how it scales to the size DoD needs. But I think that, like any tech that's getting adopted, just like when the first days of SCORM, it was just people taking PowerPoints and slapping them into a browser. And even what we're finding with XAPI, a lot of the analytics that folks are generating are very LMS-like. And that as we go deeper and get more granular insights, we're going to be able to really bump up on all fronts. I suspect as we start to adopt, you're going to get some very low-level MOM integration, at what, maybe it's just completions or whatnot. My hope is that over time, this will pick up and it will become adopted, and then it will become, something that can be thrown out and matured enough to where it's thrown out as policy guidance down the road. I don't expect that to happen right away, but part of what we need to do is start getting a lot of these things instrumented, and so that's where these meetings of talking with the Pearls folks and the Palms folks and other people that are doing recommender systems, to think about how do you generate those. So a recommender system might have the goal setting and the planning and all the other aspects that a typical mobile application or a simulator or a serious game may not have. To your point earlier, one of the things that I've also been real interested in is kind of aligning, on our vocab server, we have a whole list of XAPI activity types. And I think that one of the things that we ought to be looking at is how do we align all those different activity types, to the metadata standard that we're pulling out there. I think that we can start to unite a lot of these different pillars, so to speak.
Hey, just a comment on that, by the way, that has nothing to do with the MOM profile. I forget what profile it is. It's very big, though, and it has a lot of different concepts. And just personal opinion, it actually makes that vocab server harder to use. Happy to talk about that offline, but you reminded me of it, and I haven't said that to anybody. So, but I have some comments, Brent, maybe offline we could talk about it.
John, I can give you a quick answer on that. If you're talking about the DoD ISD profile, the working group actually agreed that it should be considered more of a vocabulary reference for verbs rather than actual profile. So yes, you can, as authoritative as I can be as a CETA, you don't have to include that.
Got it. Yeah, I actually ended up copying all the stuff into a spreadsheet and then organizing it by the URL so that I could filter those out when I was creating another profile. But a story for another day. Thanks, Andy.
Given the given that there are going to be multiple systems, some of them are going to fall into different, clusters of either recommender or activity provider, so on and so forth. Has there been thought of creating MOM subprofiles that are specific to those data providing systems? Or is the goal to keep MOM as a single, I guess, monolithic profile?
So that's a really good question, and I think that goes more into the implementation, and I would say that hopefully this group will help inform that. I think our going in approach is that it would call the other, the activity profiles or the domain profiles and maybe use those in conjunction. Really, the MOM is just about reporting up and out, whereas those profiles like the series games or ebook or whatever are, focused internal to the learning activity. I mean, at least that's my impression.
Gotcha. That makes sense. I was thinking more from the perspective of trying to, deal with this, like, these clusters of related data points and activities, and trying to, also address the previous point of like having super large profiles oftentimes makes them harder to consume as a human. So I think that having some kind of I guess breaking up or some sort of clustering based design to like the profiles that compose the MOM or that the MOM references, just so that way you can add structure via the composition of profiles, if that makes sense.
Hey, Will, I'll just add on to that. Also the way, if you go back to the way SCORM worked and, things were broken up, even API and data model and metadata, and that also allowed us to build, time. People's time is hard to get, especially when they're volunteering it. And we were able to get, hey, listen, you can only care about metadata. You don't care about the API and the data model and all this stuff. Can you go and join this group just to care about metadata? And in this case, I know this is a little different because it's all kind of runtime tracking data, but you might get people who really care about the goal setting and that type of stuff, and other people who really care about tracking content because they're building authoring tools or whatever. And that would also help you kind of narrow down to the right people.
I think a large part of that ties into these other communities too, especially some of the HR, folks, because they're going to be setting goals of mandatory, and annual training and all the other things like that. So I know that like some of the work that's going on with Ready Relevant Learning and the My Navy Learning HR pieces, I mean, they're starting to look at a lot of that. And so some of those conversations that we're having with the government side are being well received, because now they're seeing how training and education ties to these other enterprise systems. And I think that's the context that the MOM needs to be looked at from. We're doing a good job at the edge of trying to strengthen up the training. Now we're looking at how do we support the infrastructure needed to handle all of this. If that makes any sense.
Yeah, totally. I think that building off of that, by having kind of the sub-MOM profiles, that also allows them to be used outside of the DoD context, and furthers adoption and all that good stuff.
Tacking onto that, the MOM, when it moves outside of DoD and moves into enterprise, what is the group in the organization or the enterprise that owns the data? Where is it stored? And what type of business system do we envision that actually maintains and provides that utility to the business?
That's another good question. I don't have all the answers to that. I can tell you that in conversations with some big organizations like Shell Oil, for example, they're going through the same types of modernization that that other organizations like DoD are going through. I forget how many subsidiaries they had, something like 1,800, and each one has its own little set of training, and they're trying to consolidate that all across, just like all the different DoD functional areas and components and services. I think a lot of organizations are trying to sort that out. I would argue that in some ways DoD is trying to sort out, like, where does all that information reside? There's policy in DoD that DMDC handles all the learner data, and there's a lot of conversations with them about taking ownership of this whole enterprise learner record repository, but we don't know the answers to that yet, and I'd be guilty if I even tried. So part of that is we're trying to create the data, and here's all the different types of data that the training and education community can provide to you. And then it's, so within DoD, we think we have a good idea where that's going to reside. And that's going to reside underneath that Enterprise Digital Learning Modernization Program. I don't know where the parallel would be inside of a General Motors or a Cisco. I suspect that it would sit in within their HR, which is where a lot of that corporate training, I believe, resides, part of their corporate universities and whatnot. But I'm sure that if you were to look at 20 use cases, you might see 20 different approaches for managing that. So part of it is let's build the data, and hopefully they will come and figure out how to utilize and capitalize on that. Brent's opinion, anyway.
Thanks, Brent.
So I know we got about 20 more minutes to this. Marcus or Florian, did you have other things? Trey, did you have other things that you wanted to talk? I feel like I've kind of monopolized part of the conversation. Hopefully I adequately conveyed everything we've been talking about.
No, I wouldn't say you monopolized it. It definitely added a lot of value to the conversation. I think it's been a good dialogue. We did definitely, we kept the recording going, so I think it's good that we captured this conversation. If there are any kind of concerns about that, let me know. But I think we'll be able to use that to kind of learn from it internally, and also I think there were some questions. I think Chad was asking if it could be made available to share with his engineering team. I don't think there are any objections. Brent, I don't know if you would disagree, so we'll just probably share that out. Everybody make that available. Yeah. Trey or Florian, did you want to add anything?
Nothing from me.
I will say that as you guys go forth and think about this in any way, shape, or form, as you get into the weeds with some of this, and Aaron, especially with the work you and Megan and Eva and team are doing on the profile server, if you're not comfortable speaking out in front of everybody, shoot me a note. We'll set up a private meeting. I want to hear ground truth on to make sure that we're doing the right thing here. I know all of you, and we're all kind of pedaling the same direction and trying to do good things across the board. So I value all of your opinions on this, and so we want to make sure that we're doing everyone justice as we move forward. This stuff isn't trivial, as we all know.
Yeah, in that vein too, because we do have folks like Chad joining, and he may share the recording with his engineering team, and we're looking at currently this informal just dialogue and conversation for information sharing is set up to be a weekly conversation. I don't know if we can maybe get a quick poll on if there's any kind of sense for whether weekly is too frequently, or if that seems good for this type of conversation, or if we should move to maybe something quite a little less frequent. But as you kind of maybe digest what we've kind of discussed here, and you have any other questions that pop up after parsing through the information, kind of if you want to have those ready, you can either send them to us, to ADL, to me maybe directly, if you need an immediate answer, or if you wanted to kind of queue those up for next meeting, we can do that too. We're doing this in an informal way. We're kind of trying to accommodate the community here and how you guys would like to best interact with ADL to kind of share this the dialogue about the TLA and the mom in particular. So we're focusing on the mom for the current time period, but as Brent early alluded to, we're kind of we would like to kind of move on to other topics and themes as appropriate, and once we've kind of disseminated information about the mom and everybody feels comfortable. So any thoughts on the frequency of the meeting? Or are there any other questions that have kind of come up?
This is true. I think 90 minutes for a weekly with the number of people here does seem, I don't want to say excessive, but just going from like the kind of burnout we've had from the webinars, right? Those are like 2.5 or 3, and they are starting to feel a little bit kind of tired. Same with sort of the flashbacking group, even though that was only like bi-weekly. Eventually, like, you know, people just got kind of tired talking about it. I don't know, that's just personal experience. I don't know if anyone else has opinions on that. For as far as 90 minutes for a weekly meeting.
Yeah, I think I echo that sentiment. It seems a little much. Everybody, you know, we want to be respectful of everybody's time and kind of also the ability to kind of participate. I think Chad, was it Chad that suggested bi-weekly? I'm not opposed to that. So if anybody wanted to chime in the chat, kind of what your feeling was regarding.
Yeah, this is Shelley. I'd suggest that instead of arbitrarily setting a weekly or bi-weekly or whatever date, it would be helpful to know like what are immediate and midterm deliverable timelines, because this is stuff that affects everyone on the call. And if we can be helpful, we should be helpful in a way that is directed towards supporting those timelines.
Could you rephrase that? So you meant the kind of the ADL's timelines in terms of developing and working on the TLA and
well,
the mom?
It seems like the two things sitting out here that are really important to everyone involved are the formalization of the mom profile so that it could go up the chain to get a PAR in IEEE, and secondly, the relation between that and the profile server so it can serve the needs of mom and be referenced within the XAPI profile standard itself that will be developed separately at IEEE. So I'd like to understand sort of like, are we talking about a year-long schedule, or are we talking about a 3-year-long schedule, like, and wrap meetings accordingly so that we don't just have an arbitrary weekly or bi-weekly meeting.
So I'm going to interject there because I think the technology development schedule is a little bit different from the standardization schedule. So we can certainly provide you, the milestones for the profile server and some of those other things. And I would imagine that most of those are probably a next 6-month type of thing on when those are going to be available. I'll defer to Aaron and Megan and Eva on that. But the standardization, as we all know, is a whole different enchilada. That would likely take years. We have the draft mom. I believe, Florian, you sent me an updated version of that after you made all those changes, right? I think I still need to go through and polish that up.
Yeah, so the version of the spec version is not as easy to find to give that to you, but the JSON version is on GitHub.
Okay. But so I think we can take that action. One of the things I like about what you said, Shelley, is we can maybe work with Andy. Andy has this overall XAPI roadmap that we admittedly have not updated in some time, but I think with all the other ongoing activities, Andy, it might be time to update that a little bit. because we can start to talk about some of the CMI5 stuff and some of the other things that are coming on. We don't have to release it right away, but we can get it out there and get it prepped anyway.
I guess my biggest concern with timelines, particularly as relates to standardization, is formalizing things around MOM prior to formalizing things around the XAPI profile-based specification itself, because I don't want considerations made for MOM to necessarily influence the final version of the XAPI profile standard. I would rather it be the other way around.
So I like your thinking. I agree wholeheartedly that the XAPI profile spec needs to be finalized and released as soon as possible after the standard XAPI 2.0 is released, my humble opinion. And then that ought to drive the MOM. I mean, this is still very much in the research stage of doing things. We're trying to build the MOM profile out so that we can start to evaluate whether it works, how do we get additional learning activities, how do we really integrate it with a learning management system. We built this listener called a LEM around Moodle, but how does that work at scale? How do we do that with mobile? All these other types of learning activities that we can start to report out on. And then I think that over time, and that's kind of my point, from a development schedule, we've got the MOM fairly mature. We're going to have the profile server out along with the MOM profile probably within the next 6 months or so. But that's a technology development schedule, and that's completely independent of the standard schedule. And I think that actually works in our favor because it still gives us a couple years to fine tune the MOM, to tweak it, to hone the profile, to iterate. And the lessons learned that we're going to have over the next 2 years may result in a profoundly different MOM structure than we currently have. But I think getting the profile and getting all these other infrastructure blocks into place allow us to start honing in on that accurate solution. So I think we're saying the same thing.
Yeah, so to go back to Shelley's, I think, concern, it's a valid concern about kind of the purpose of the meetings and just kind of also kind of echoing Trey's concern with just kind of having meetings for meeting's sake. I think because this group call is, I mean, it's an informal thing. I think we also see it as, this is not supposed to be an ADL lecture series. We'd like to have it as a kind of just informal kind of collaborative interface between ADL and our performers, and primarily at this point. And it's also serving a couple different purposes. One of which is being kind of a open door kind of office policy where we kind of have chats and discussions. But to Shelley's point, I agree that it would be good if we have kind of specific topics to discuss. And to that end, if Shelley, for example, you're concerned regarding the sequencing of events and scheduling, if you wanted to kind of pose that to the group, that is kind of a valid and good topic to discuss, probably maybe during the next calls, and kind of make sure that we hash out schedules between all the different projects, make sure that ADL is not overlooking things regarding sequencing. And I think that can inform and improve kind of everyone's thinking on the process. So that being said, I mean, I encourage everyone on the call to kind of pose possible topics for meetings, and maybe we'll schedule those kind of specific topic discussions while still maintaining looks like maybe bi-weekly open door kind of meeting for kind of ad hoc conversations or discussions about TLA, MOM, maybe field additional questions, probably include some additional performers. Does that sound agreeable?
Agreed here, yeah.
Okay. Any input from the ADL side, maybe, since it's kind of just posing that as a possible.
It sounds good to me.
Organizational structure. Okay, good. Good. All right. I think we're approaching the end of the time frame we had allotted, and it clearly has been a very fruitful conversation. We almost made it to 90 minutes. We've had some people that had to drop off, I think, a little earlier. Probably kind of to the point that maybe 90 minutes is a little too much. But we'll hash that out. So with that, I think unless there's any other questions, again, the recording will be made available for kind of sharing internally among maybe other engineering groups, or we'll probably share that with our kind of West Coast performers that may just be waking up. So if there's, are there any other questions or kind of concerns, feedback?
Nope, but I would like to clarify while I'm still on tape that, these, we know that this is your time, and so these meetings are not required. These are not mandatory. They're optional, and they do help us tremendously. And you guys are so much the experts on what we're doing here, so your time is appreciated. Last thing is for the actual vendors that are building learning activities, your insights are also greatly appreciated. This is not intended as a requirement to instrument your activities with the mom right now. These are all just kind of fact-finding discussions and whatnot. All things will still go forward with your PWSs as they have been. Van, any other sides on that? Is he still on?
Still here, nothing additional. Good meeting.
Okay. All right. So again, if you wanted anyone else from your kind of internal groups to be added to the call invite, just reach out to me, Marcus Purcell. Kind of reply to the invite if you'd like, and I'll make sure to get those included on there. And we will send out a link to the recording that you can share internally. And I think we'll schedule this meeting for 2 weeks from now, on a kind of a bi-monthly recurring schedule for the moment. And I think kind of Shelley's point about the sequencing and the schedules, it's probably a good conversation to have. So if I could ask everyone to kind of maybe think about that a little bit as it relates to your own projects, in any other concerns you may have, or requests for information from us in that regard, that'd be helpful to carry that on, that conversation on. But with that, we have 4 more minutes. We'll give back to everyone. But I do appreciate everyone's attendance, and I think it was a great meeting. And with that, I hope everyone has a good day.